I remember kneeling at the crawlspace, my phone light shaking across raw wood. The following wasn't mine. I raised the light, something exhaled from the darkness. A badge, just a plastic clip, slid off his jacket and dropped between the joists. The week before Halloween, the fall, I moved into a ranch-style rental off a frontage road outside town. I don't like talking about it, but it's better than letting you think porch lights flicker for no reason. I moved the last box into the living room on a Wednesday in late October. The house was single-story with a shallow porch, a new lock, and a peephole that gave a fisheye view of the quiet block. My landlord had warned me about the porch light. He said the previous tenant mentioned a flicker that came and went. He told me the wiring was old. I believed him until the flicker started making sense. The first night I noticed it while sorting kitchen drawers. 3 blinks, a pause, 2 blinks. He was almost conversational, the way a turn signal feels when you're sitting at a light too long. I turned the switch off. The bulb still pulsed once before dying, as if echoing a heartbeat. The next evening, it returned. I watched from the front window and realized it wasn't randomness. The intervals were similar, like someone following a pattern. I remember thinking it was power bleed from the neighbor's house. I didn't know the neighbor yet. His blinds stayed closed. His yard was raked differently from the rest of the block, leaves gathered in precise fans. By Friday, I caught something else. The light never flickered when I stood outside. It only spoke when I was inside with the switch on, as if whoever was sending it didn't want to be seen. That was the first time I felt watched, not directly, more like measured. I left the switch off and slept in a living room of shadows and unpacked cardboard. Saturday, a light rain came in sheets, turning the road into a smear of headlights. I spent the day assembling a bed frame and didn't think about the porch until evening. I turned the switch on out of habit. Within minutes, the pattern returned. 3 blinks, pause, 2 blinks. I reached for the peephole and saw nothing but wet porch and darkness beyond the rail. I told myself that if it were a person, they would knock. I got the knock an hour later. Not hard, just 3 slow taps that made the wood vibrate under my feet. I remember calling through the door with my voice kept even, asking if everything was okay. The person didn't answer. There was a second knock, same cadence. I checked the peephole and saw only the shine of my own eye in it. I went for the back door and stepped into the yard to loop around the house. The rain softened to mist. At the end of the block, a car sat idling with no headlights. The shape was that practical sedan you only notice when you look twice, unremarkable, maybe grey. I remember the engine note, low and steady like someone trying not to draw attention. When I stepped back toward the corner, the car killed its engine completely. I returned to the door and found the doormat flipped over. My name, written in black marker on a taped envelope, lay beneath it. Inside was a single key. It wasn't my key and it didn't fit my locks. Taped to it was a note, just a scribble that said I should keep this safe, in someone else's handwriting. I put it in a drawer and tried to tell myself it was a prank left over from the last tenant. I slept badly and woke twice to the sound of soft steps on the porch, pacing once from rail to rail. Sunday afternoon, I was driving back from the grocery store when I noticed the same sedan 2 cars behind me. I kept checking my mirrors without wanting to make it obvious. It stayed with me through 2 turns that made sense for nobody but me. When I signaled for my block, the sedan flashed its high beams once and slowed. I turned anyway, and it didn't follow. I told myself I was being paranoid. That night, the porch light flickered while I ate, standing at the counter. 3 blinks. Pause. 2 blinks. Then the doorbell rang. The sound made me grip the edge of the counter hard enough that I felt the laminate bite into my fingers. I went to the peephole and saw the brim of a hat and the edge of a jacket. The person stood too close, so I couldn't see a face. He said he was with the county. Not loud, polite. He said a call came in about a break-in and he needed to check my backyard. I asked for a badge number and he gave me one that he repeated twice with no hesitation. He didn't move away from the door. He said he just needed quick access. I told him I would call dispatch to confirm. I remember the silence that followed. No shuffling, no sighing. Just a pause that made him sound confused, like he wasn't used to being challenged. He took a half step back, and that let me see the jacket clearly. It had a patch, but the thread frayed like it had been pulled off something else and stitched where it didn't belong. The hat had no insignia. The radio on his shoulder was the kind you can buy online. No channel chatter, no squawk, just a block of plastic with a stub antenna. I told him to wait while I called. He said that wasn't necessary and that he didn't want to waste my time. He stepped sideways out of the peephole's view, and I felt the instinct that gets you to back away from the door, even when it's locked. I went to the kitchen to dial the non-emergency number. When I came back, he was no longer at the door. The porch light was off. I never turned it off. The next day I called my landlord and asked if anyone else had a key. He said the locks were re-keyed the week before I moved in. He sounded irritated by my questions until I mentioned a man claiming to be law enforcement. He admitted the previous tenant left because of weirdness she couldn't prove, which sounded like a way of saying you should have asked more questions before you signed. I spent the day at work thinking about the crawl space that ran under the living room. The vent screens were old. When I got home, I checked the vents and found one at the side of the house pushed in, just enough to make a single black rectangle. The ground below it was disturbed. Inside, the living room felt like a box with something written on the outside. I turned the porch light on and stood by the peephole for 15 minutes. Nothing moved. Then a breath touched my ear that I registered as mine until I realized it came from the floor. I dropped to a knee and pressed my ear to the board. There was an exhale, wet, quiet, human. I grabbed my phone and opened the crawl space door in the hallway closet. The smell was old soil and fiberglass. I remember thinking about all the things that live in that kind of air, that don't care if you know they're there. I aimed my phone light into the low darkness and heard a shuffle that synchronized with my heartbeat. That's when the badge fell. It wasn't even metal. It was a plastic clip-on with a foil sticker that had an eagle printed on it. It slipped off a jacket sleeve, hit the beam, and slid between joists into a drift of cat hair dust. I remember saying, in a voice so small I couldn't recognize it as mine, that I was calling the police right now, and I was not opening the door again. The breathing grew faint, then moved laterally, scraping along wood. It stopped under the living room. I backed into the kitchen, keeping the phone aimed at the dark square. I set it on the counter while I dialed. When I looked up, the phone light was still pointed at the crawl space opening, but the beam had shifted as if something had brushed it. The call connected. My voice sounded clumsy, like I was reading a statement I'd memorized and kept forgetting mid-sentence. When the knock came at the front door, it wasn't careful. It was a hollow, angry palm. 3 hits, pause, 2 hits. I walked back to the peephole. The porch was empty. The doormat was missing. A wet ellipse marked where it had been, like someone had wrung out a towel there. I didn't open the door until the patrol car arrived and made a slow pass. Blue light flickered through the living room. They didn't find anyone under the house. They did find the vent screen peeled back and boot marks in the damp soil. One of the officers told me the boot tread was older, military surplus, or a knockoff like a lot of people wear. He said they would log my report. He said I should keep the porch light on and get cameras. He didn't sound like he thought those things would fix anything. I bought a cheap doorbell camera and a battery flood for the yard. I slept 2 hours at a stretch. Monday night I decided to leave the house and clear my head. I drove with the radio off and felt the silence like a seatbelt fastened too tight. I saw the sedan 2 minutes after turning onto the frontage road. It eased in behind me and matched my speed like we were sharing a signal I couldn't hear. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. At the next light, I caught the driver's face in the mirror, only the lower half. Mouth relaxed, a shape like a scar or a dimple. No uniform, no hat. When the light turned, he let 2 cars pass, then slotted behind me again. That's when I felt it. Whatever this was belonged to me now, tethered by a chain that didn't rely on address or locks. I took the longer way home, past a closed gas station and a dark strip mall. The sedan stayed back several car lengths. I tried a trick I remembered from an old roommate. I turned into a neighborhood I didn't live in and took 3 right turns in a box to see if he repeated them. He did. I dragged my turn signal late on the last corner and watched his high beams flash once in irritation. I made a final right that put me onto a dead street, ending at a field. I didn't stop. I backed into a driveway and killed my lights. He rolled past slowly, and I saw his profile for the first time. Clean jawline, no beard, a neutral expression, the kind you wear when you want your face to be a forgettable thing. The car kept going. I waited, counted 30, then pulled out and headed home the other way, thinking I had shaken him. When I reached my block, the porch light was already on. I hadn't left it on. The doorbell camera pinged my phone with a thumbnail, nothing but empty porch. I parked 2 houses down and watched from the dark. No sedan, no person. The light did its thing. 3 blinks, pause, 2 blinks. I realized the timing wasn't random at all. It aligned with the knocks I'd been hearing. It was a rehearsal, or a promise. I jogged to the door with my keys ready. The walk fought me, catching halfway like someone had talked it from inside. I got in and turned every light on. I carried a chair to the hallway and wedged it under the crawlspace door. I told myself I would make it through one more night and call a locksmith in the morning. At 2 a.m., the doorbell camera sent a motion alert. The clip showed my porch from a low, wide angle. Rain whispered off the roofline. For a full minute, nothing moved. Then a shape rose into the top of frame, just the edge of a hat brim and a hand, carefully placing my missing doormat back on the concrete. The hand tapped twice on the mat, as if to press it into place. The clip ended there. I didn't sleep. I sat with the porch camera open on my phone and listened to the occasional car on the frontage road. When dawn came, I opened the door to find the mat perfectly centered and a new note tucked under it. The paper was damp and the ink blurred where water had touched it. The note didn't have a message. It had a printed police seal cut from a brochure glued off center. Someone had circled the eagle with a shaky hand that pressed too hard. I called a locksmith as soon as they opened. He replaced both locks and showed me fresh marks on the strike plate, like someone had tried a key that almost fit and kept turning it. I asked if a similar blank could be filed down to work. He said if you know what you're doing, you can make a lot of things almost work. The officer who took my updated statement told me something I wrote down because it sounded like the only true thing anyone said. If someone wants to look official, they will look official, right until the moment you ask for something specific. The badge they recovered from my crawl space turned out to be from a children's costume kit, the kind that comes with a plastic whistle and a felt hat. The number the man gave me didn't correspond to anything. The doorbell camera kept catching small, senseless things over the next 2 nights. A pair of boot prints that appeared after rain, then vanished the next morning. A blurry face at the edge of the frame that was only a reflection from a passing truck when I rewatched it with the brightness turned down. I lived in a state I can only describe as patient fear, the kind that doesn't spike so much as hum. On Halloween night, the neighborhood filled with kids and reflective tape and the soft avalanche of costumes on concrete. I kept the porch light on because that's what you do when you're a decent person. I stood by the door with a bowl of candy and tried to be normal. Around 8, a group I didn't recognize came up the walkway. A tall man in plain clothes with 2 younger kids in masks. He stood back, hands in pockets, letting the kids step forward. One wore a cheap felt police hat. The brim looked familiar. I handed out candy and closed the door gently. I watched them through the peephole as they turned, and the man glanced up at the door the way you do when you check a house number. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He had just confirmed that I was still where he left me. I wish the story ended with a clear break, but the truth is softer. The porch light stopped flickering the week after I replaced the switch, which makes it tempting to believe the problem was always electrical. The sedan never reappeared in a way I could prove. The crawlspace door stayed shut. The vent screens stayed in place. Months later, When I moved, the landlord told me the next tenant never reported anything strange. What stuck with me wasn't the knock, or the car, or even the plastic badge. It was the pattern I learned to read without wanting to admit it was a language. 3 knocks, pause, 2 knocks. The first set announces, the second tests. When I hear a porch-like buzz now, I still count in my head without meaning to. If I reach 3 before it stops, I leave. I don't check the peephole. I don't ask for numbers. I don't play the part of a door someone thinks they can practice on. If a badge ever falls between the joists again, I won't be the one holding the flashlight.